G'day mate, 40 here doing an emergency live stream. I just don't think the White House really understands who they're going up against, alright? Do they understand the formidable power and influence and the Machiavellian thinking of the ruthless president of the White House Correspondents Association? I don't think they know who they're up against, guys. They're up against Eugene Daniels of Politico. He's heading to MSNBC soon. Free Beacon has an excellent article telling us about this formidable player. MSNBC's newest anchor, Eugene Daniels, is a Kamala Harris encyclopedia who has revolutionized the DC fashion scene. It's unclear if the former Politico correspondent will face wardrobe restrictions at the left-wing network. But does the White House understand who they are messing with? All right, he is their White House correspondent right now for Politico, but just a ruthless thinker. I don't think the White House really understands what's going on here. All right, he was supposed to be one of the breakout stars of the 2024 election because he was so much in love with Kamala Harris, ended up being one of the election's biggest losers. He's leaving Politico to join MSNBC. He's an expert in all things Kamala Harris, and he's got a fashion sense that mirrors his bold style of reporting. And he will co-host a weekend roundtable show as part of the left-wing network's ongoing reorganization efforts. It's unclear whether the self-described walking Beyoncé encyclopedia will face any wardrobe restrictions at MSNBC, but a Washington Free Beacon photographic analysis confirms that Eugene Daniels has a bold sense of fashion, certainly appears to admire Beyoncé, who's married to Jay-Z. All right, do the White House know who they're going up against here? I mean, this guy is formidable. He is bold, and he is brassy, and just incredible fashion sense. I mean, he's brave. You don't see many White House correspondents with this level of bravery. I mean, this guy is fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. And at the same time, right, he's got a smile that just lights up a room. He's got charisma to burn, right? And he's not just ruthless. He's also got a beguiling fashion sense that just kind of lulls you to how ruthless this guy is. And then he's fierce. I mean, look how fierce he is. Does President Trump know who he's going up against? I'm concerned that they don't know who they're going up against. Right? If only they knew. Right? He's a friendly guy. All right? The White House should understand, guys, President Trump, you should understand, you can make deals with Eugene Daniels. He's friendly. He's a loving man. He's got a lot of love. He just needs to be treated with appropriate levels of respect. Fabulous. Just absolutely fabulous. Just outrageous, fabulous, beguiling. And he's full of joy. Right, just a very joyful man, a soulful man. There's so many layers to Eugene Daniels. He's a regular on Jeffrey Goldberg's Washington Week in Review. He looks great in a mask. And now he's at MSNBC. All right, let's have a look at, very quickly, Fighters, Failures, and Freaks, the definitive list of winners and losers of the 2024 election. Winners, diversity. Donald Trump improved his margins compared to 2020 among every measurable demographic, with the exception of seniors and college-educated white women. Hillary Clinton. She's no longer the only Democrat who lost to Trump. Mental health professionals. They're about to make a fortune treating the emotional breakdowns of college-educated white women and deranged liberals and journalists who base their entire personalities on hating Donald Trump and his supporters. Dean Phillips. He was the only Democrat with the balls to run against Joe Biden in the Democratic primary. He was mocked, he was ridiculed, but he has been vindicated. He tried to warn them, but they did not listen. Thank you for your good work, Dean Phillips. Josh Shapiro. Kamala Harris didn't pick Josh Shapiro, the popular Democratic governor of Pennsylvania. Jeff Bezos. He'll get even richer when Trump rescues the economy again. Tony Hinchcliffe made a joke about Puerto Rico, and the journalists melted down. They insist this would cost Trump the election. Trump ends up winning 46% of the Latino vote, a new record for a GOP candidate, and Trump dominated Puerto Rican strongholds. Joe Rogan, Elon Musk, Sunny Hostin, the other ladies of The View. They asked Kamala Harris, what would you do differently compared to Joe Biden? There's not a thing that comes to mind, she said. Women. Trump's victory will usher in a golden era of women's rights. It will be safe to play sports again. Women can say Merry Christmas and be attractive without getting publicly shamed. Scott Jennings, star on CNN. Never lost his cool. McDonald's. Mark Halperin. Yes, Mark Halperin's independent reporting, sober analysis throughout the campaign was vastly superior, more informative than the mainstream media's hackish hyperventilating. Presciently predicted that Trump would win, that his victory would cause the greatest mental health crisis in the history of our country. By contrast, Halperin's former journalistic partner, MSNBC analyst John Heilman, refused to break from Harris, and even after the election, he said Harris raised an insane amount of money, crushed Trump in the debate, and closed stronger than he did. Patrick Ruffini, Republican pollster, anticipated the election in his 2023 book, Party of the People Inside the Multiracial Populist Coalition Remaking the GOP. Atlas Intel, most accurate pollster of the 2020 election cycle, did it again this year, predicting Trump would win every swing state as well as the popular vote. Naturally, the firm was largely ignored by mainstream media outlets. Israel, losers. Joe Biden, Tim Walz, the Obamas, Doug Emhoff, Alex Soros, Eugene Daniels. He was supposed to be the breakout star of the 2024 election. The self-described walking Beyoncé Encyclopedia covered the Harris campaign for Politico, where he excelled at laundering Democratic talking points. Known for his flamboyant attire, Daniels became a minor celebrity within the Beltway bubble, which means most normal Americans have never heard of him. Mainstream media, Ann Seltzer, Lincoln Project, other losers, criminals, Trump will make crime illegal again, terrorists in Iran, Ben Rhodes. Okay, but the big picture, does the White House understand the brat energy that they are going up against with the formidable Eugene Daniels?
In that Palisades, LA area to say, I got to suck it up because we need money. If I were Speaker Johnson, I'd put some conditions on that to sell the aid, which is also a big thing for conservatives to say that there are reforms in here, whether it's the water management or whatever. But I think that they could get a win in this and pull a Democrat or two aboard because you don't need 5, you need 2 or 3.
Yep. Raise your hand here if you're on the two-way platform, want to be in on the conversation. All right. I want to talk about the White House Correspondents Association. They're at war with the White House, and it escalated yesterday in all sorts of ways, including the replacement of people in the pool. Today in the pool is The Independent and News Nation and the Daily Signal. I don't believe those entities previously were allowed in the pool. Now, CBS is in the pool. Reuters is the wire. SRN Radio. I confess I don't know what that is. You guys know what that
Salem
is?
Radio Network.
Salem Radio Network. I know what Salem Radio Network is. Hence the abbreviation. Are they in the radio pool traditionally, or is that new?
I thought they were, but when that came out, I questioned it. So I don't believe so because I've never seen them fly on the plane. I don't remember that. So.
So this matters for a number of reasons. It matters because if there are First Amendment issues here, and there's coverage issues and accountability issues. There's also the fact that the White House can discombobulate the White House correspondents because they're all thinking about this as opposed to accountability in a more broader way. It also matters, I think, something we'll talk about in a second, which is the broader power plays that are going on, not just in the White House, but throughout corporate world and academia and Hollywood. There's all sorts of changes happening. But before we get to the more general topic, Sean, it's clear to me that folks in the White House are being very sophisticated about how they're conducting this war against the White House Correspondents Association. What do you see in the White House Correspondents Association? Are they playing a sophisticated game back, or are they just completely overmatched?
They're overmatched. So they put out a statement last night under, we've talked about Eugene Daniels, under his name, basically saying, so this is the way it works. We described the pool in the past, right? So they all go into the Oval Office or whatever, the plane, and the president will speak or whatever, and then they send dispatches back. So the print pooler will write up, entered the room, the president, everything from the description of the room, there were 5 people standing around him, here's who they were. He was standing behind the desk. They're trying to give color to the room and the situation, and then they'll put phrases together. So they'll say, the president remarked on this. He was asked 5 questions. I'll try to pull one up right now.
Yeah, and some of these things are visible in the video that everybody gets of the event. Some of them are not because the camera doesn't show them. And if it's Air Force One and the president comes back and talks, they're not typically, sometimes they are, but they're not typically on camera. Or if the president comes back and speaks off the record, or an official does. So some of the pool material, it's simply getting stuff out quicker. Some of it is, it's if you don't get it from the pool report, you're not going to get it.
Right. And it's sometimes very basic stuff. The helicopter took off at, so I'm reading this. This is from yesterday, 1:47 p.m. Some cabinet members are scheduled to do local media in the Rose Garden. There's also a probability that some may stop by the Sticks, which is an area right outside the West Wing where they have locations. It's just updating the pool on, the rest of the correspondents. And so the reason I say all that is to just explain, the White House Correspondents Association last night said, hey, if these guys are going to expand the pool, we have certain standards that we have given our members who do these dispatches and reports to us. We can't verify them. So everybody should potentially stop sending those dispatches anymore. So the way it works, Mark Halperin's the pooler for the day, is what they call it. He goes in and writes the report, blah, 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 and you send it to an email, and then it gets distributed to all the members that are on that list. They're telling their folks, you guys might want to stop doing that, which I think is interesting because it sort of like that. My mom used to say, just cut off your nose to spite itself or whatever. It's like you're
your face.
Yeah. You're holding the whole group. You're screwing everybody now for doing that. Again, this is silly because it's additive. They're adding people to the pool. So it's just they're getting pissed that they can't be controlling it anymore.
Right. So Dan, their goal, I think, would be to go back to the way it was before. That's not going to happen. So if you weren't advising the White House Correspondents Association, what should their goals be now in this war where they're, as Sean said, overmatched, and how should they achieve them?
Yeah, look, I think this isn't chess. This is boxing, and they're getting almost knocked out. I would collaborate with them. I mean, at the end of the day, if they take the ball and try to go home and say, well, now you can't get the news out, that's absurd. They can go right around.
It hurts everybody.
Right. They can click a button and send out the news.
Okay. So what should they should go to Caroline Leavitt and say what? What should their goals be now?
Just say, look, we don't want to keep being at war. We understand you want to add new voices. We fully support it. I would just move past this. I know we're going to get to this, but the idea that they are God, they are bigger than the White House, and they control this process, it's just crazy. I mean, you have to modernize, you have to move forward. And I don't see how they're going to win because they are content providers. They are not content producers. The producers are the White House. It always will be.
The fundamental problem in this is I've spoken to both sides on this. Last night, I had an opportunity to speak to a couple senior members of the White House Correspondents organization, as well as I've obviously talked to the folks. The problem is we talked about, and I jokingly said to someone last night, Eugene Daniels, who leads this, who's currently still a Politico employee, has announced that he's leaving. We all know the dirty secret because he's going to MSNBC. Therefore, it won't be a White House correspondent, anymore. And I jokingly said to somebody last night, a member of the Correspondents Association, I said, if you guys were smart, you would make the case that, hey, or allow him to leave the presidency because the White House is not going to negotiate with him. He is an outspoken fanboy of Kamala. And so they have a leadership problem right now, and it gives them the perfect reason. But, this is where ego gets in the way. He wants to chair the dinner and hang out with the Hollywood folks, and he selected the comedian. This is their problem. This is a situation where leadership matters. And the Correspondents Association, to your point, Dan, it's a game of boxing, but it's boxing with someone who doesn't, has never been in the ring. And they have a feckless leader who no one respects at the White House. And that's the fundamental problem.
Guys, when Democrats have power again, and we will, we'll choose who to put in the pool. Great. And if it's one-sided and we pay a price, we pay a price. The market will dictate this, not a bunch of people sitting around.
Sean, yesterday I said if we were at the White House, they would let us come to the photo op. Did you notice that they let our friend from Fox and Friends into the photo op?
Lawrence.
Lawrence was not in the pool, but Lawrence got to ask a bunch of questions. And so you're going to see more of that. People have asked me, what does it matter who's in the room? It's like who cares? Well, one thing is, you do get to ask questions. Now, some people ask good questions and some bad, but you get an opportunity to ask the president questions. And in theory, that should be a moment of accountability. And the other is the prestige of it, right? It's the prestige of it. And then third, I'd say is, again, if you're good at your job, you're going to get some things that the camera might not see. I try to put this in a broader context, which I've been thinking a lot about. I really think the left does not understand what's happening all over the country. MAGA is on fire with a sense of retribution and a sense of the opportunity to make big change, to pressure corporations, to pressure universities, to pressure the media, to pressure Hollywood, to say, new sheriff in town, old ways don't count. We are going to change it. And the right is thinking about this constantly. They're taking ground every day. They're saying, what ground can we take at Boeing? What ground can we take at Delta? What ground can we take at CAA? What ground can we take at the Olympic Committee? What ground can we take at the White House Correspondents Association? And my perception from watching and talking to people on the left is they have no idea that this is even happening. They don't appreciate how fundamental this change is. Sean, what do you think of my thesis?
I think it's funny you bring up CAA, which is it's one of the largest Hollywood talent agencies. So you've got CAA, UTA, WME. When there are countless people on the right who have signed with them in the past, and at the slightest hint of controversy, CAA will drop them. And so to your point, Mark, about retribution, this has been since college, where this isn't Donald Trump. It's just that finally somebody has taught the right how to fight back and to say we can win. I get sent some magazines every month, just because people will send me one. And one of the magazines that I got was last month was called Fast Company. It's a business magazine.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, there's an article. I'm just flipping through it, seeing what it's all about. And there's an article that says why. I've got it. I could get it for tomorrow, but it says why are corporations caving to Robby Starbuck? And Robby Starbuck has been on a mission to go after corporations and call out their DEI policies. And literally, I've asked him this, how does this work? He goes, I literally call up the PR office and I'll say, hey, I'm going after Target or McDonald's DEI policies. They will literally get the CEO on the phone with him within a matter of hours and say, okay, hey, mea culpa, we're undoing this. This is where we are now, that finally, and this is a huge flip. from where we were a few years ago, where people were like, hey, we're going to ban people who associated with Trump. We're going to go after their employers. We're going to go after their ability to, be seen in public. So there is this, Mark used the word retribution, and it's true. There is an element to which people on the right who have been banned, canceled, censored, finally feel like, hey, we can actually proudly stand up, walk down a street, and be excited for the side that we support.
Dan, one of the things that happened yesterday that fit with the paradigm I'm suggesting is Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, said we're basically going to become the Wall Street Journal editorial board, at least on the issues of liberty and the free markets. How significant, not in terms of the morale at the paper where we know it's significant, how significant is that as a cultural moment for Jeff Bezos to say our editorial board's not going to be liberal anymore?
Oh, it's a big moment on the left. I mean, I think the only thing bigger would be if the New York Times announced, we were going to do something similar. I think the issue for the left, and speaking of the Post, it goes back to November, is they have kind of convinced themselves that November was unwinnable, that it was inflation and we didn't really do anything wrong. It was like a force du jour of world events. And, Trump is, I guess we'll say, a good candidate, but nothing to have to really change on our side. And I think that they don't, they haven't come to grips with why Trump is popular. But I think what is really happening, Mark, with all of this stuff is, as is usually the case in American politics, it is the silent middle that slowly over the last 20 years became frustrated with woke issues. They became frustrated with, if you're a regular family in, the middle class, the challenges your children have if they are of a certain background, right? Because, companies had to have a profile and they had to fill certain positions, and, colleges had to have certain numbers of people. And there were all these factors beyond kind of meritocracy and beyond people's control. And it's been building in our society, and companies that even swung in the last 4 years. I know a lot of people who would say it was very hard to find positions. It was very hard to, we struggled, productivity lacked, because we had to meet all these different terms and all these different definitions. And we felt like we were on pins and needles, and people worried about, offending people. And so I think as Trump has pushed these buttons, there was a big middle of the country, literally and figuratively, it was like, amen, we're exhausted from this. Let's go in a different direction. And I think that's why they're finding success. And that's where the left just can't quite come to terms with, we were out of control. And we need to come back to the middle.
You know what? I was at an event last night with a couple Democratic members of Congress, and one of them very prominent. And he said to me, Sean, we've known each other a while, and he's from a very prominent political family, and said, I got to be honest with you, I don't know, I've got a lot of programs that go through the YMCA, the boys clubs, and I'm worried about some of the cuts that we're going to affect. And I said, yeah, I'm sorry. I get it. I understand the good that a lot of that stuff does in communities. But I said, with all due respect, you guys, and this echoes what you just said, Dan, I go, the problem is you guys went so far that now people are going, all right, well, let's kind of take it back to square one and rebuild it. But I said, I feel sorry for you. I understand what that does to your community and how important some of these programs are. I know what, the impact they had and where I grew up in different ways. But you guys went so far nuts that it's hard to now feel bad that when we pull it back, and that's the problem. He said, okay. And I said, so instead, he said, well, what do you think he goes, just give me some advice. And I said, well, my advice to you is to say, hey, we get it. We went too far. I get that some of these programs sound absolutely nuts and crazy, and you're right to cancel them, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And give specific examples. Elon talked about this yesterday in the cabinet meeting, where they got to restore things, but make the case, on merit. Say, hey, these programs do this for this community, and here's why it's important. But you guys now, you got called out, figuratively, for all of the woke, ridiculous, nonsensical spending. Now, so you have a credibility problem, and you need to come back to the table and say, okay, I get it. And I said, I'm not blaming you personally, Congressman, but I'm saying your side. And so you now need to go back to square one and say, okay, guys, how do we show you that these 5 programs weren't nuts?
Yeah.
And I also think there's a chance that Trump is going to overreach. I mean, the history of politics is get out of control and you overreach. And so I think there will be opportunities, but people won't hear us until we have some self-reflection. And I think it's not just woke. I think this went on a lot of levels to a lot of other issues where the party, all sorts of parts of society are coming back.
Yeah, let me tell you a story about the airport I'm in right now. This airport used to be called National. And I once went to a meeting with Grover Norquist, the conservative activist who's on the cutting edge of the new model that Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon and others are engaged in, where it's not just providing content, it's also making change. And they said at Grover's meeting, we're going to rename Reagan, the National Airport, after Ronald Reagan. Some of you may not remember, but it used to be Ronald Reagan was seen as the devil by the left. Now, of course, they would happily have Ronald Reagan. And no one on the left paid any attention. They paid no attention to the notion that they were going to rename the airport. And then they did, much to the horror of Gene Sperling and other people in the Clinton administration. They forced the name to change. That project is now being replicated 1,000 times over every day by people on the right who say, what can we do today from the White House, from Charlie Kirk's podcast, from Steve Bannon's podcast, from activists all over the country? What can we do today to claim some ground that the left used to control? And again, the left has no idea this is happening, as best I can tell. They have no strategy to stop it. They're overmatched. And the last thing they don't understand is how much of their power has been based on controlling these institutions.
Another funny story from last night. First of all, Mark, you know who carried the Reagan bill? This is like Dorkville.
Yeah.
Bob Barr of Georgia. That was because
correct.
What I'm doing. So I was out at this event last night, and lots of compliments about the morning meeting. And a guy came up to me and said, "I love watching your show because you guys are so blah blah blah." He goes, "Because I can't bring myself to watch Bannon's War Room." And I looked at him and I go, well, first of all, thank you for watching the morning meeting. I really appreciate that. But you should watch the War Room. And he goes, what? And I go, if you want to understand what's happening and who's driving this movement, that's the dumb. I mean, strategically, it's like, well, I'll listen to Rachel Maddow once in a while. I want to hear what the other side is saying in their arguments. Or actually, you could just watch War Room, and Bannon will play Maddow's clips too. But the point is that I was like, this is the problem. You literally, I get you enjoy our program, and God bless you, and I love you for that. But you're putting your head in the sand when it comes to understanding the other side. You don't have to like Steve, but you have to understand the power and the influence that he has in the movement. Same thing with Charlie and some of these other folks.
Yeah, but
Democrats do understand. Like out in the country, I agree with you, Mark. And I think the Gang of 500, as you like to call it, like the older generation doesn't, they get it, but they can't believe it. I do think there are people who, I think the problem is the party does not know. Okay, now what do we stand for? Like,
right.
we know what we did doesn't.
And what's worth fighting for. I can't be very articulate about how exactly the White House Correspondents Association for the last 40 years have aided and abetted Democrats over Republicans. I can hint at it, but I know intuitively they've been a part of the establishment firmament, just like corporate CEOs, just like universities, just like CAA. They've been part of buttressing Democrats. They've been creating an asymmetrical advantage for Democrats. And then the Trump White House is saying, no longer. Like, there'll be a White House group of correspondents, but the Correspondents Association, which is aided and abetted the other side, no, we're just not going to facilitate that.
I said to this person about the dinner last night, I said, look, can I just be honest with you? Let me ask you this as a reporter. If you wrote about your own dinner, but it wasn't the White House Correspondents' dinner, it was a charity, and you talked about how much money that dinner brings in and what you guys give away in charity, you would blast that organization because you charge thousands of dollars a seat, and then you give a pittance away to scholarships. And the answer I got back was, Sean, we also have to maintain a rainy day fund. I go, right. You've got to be kidding me. If you took that association, put blinders on it, and said, here's an organization that raises a ton of money by hosting a liberal dinner every year, raises millions, and then gives a pittance to charity, you would call that a scam.
Yes, Dan, let me just explain. Maybe I can put it in a different way. They are losing assets right now every day. The DEI programs are going away from all these corporations. Right? Bezos is flipping to be the Wall Street Journal editorial board. If you're a leader of the Democratic Party, you're not in a position to fight to save these assets. There'd be no, even if you wanted to, you probably couldn't at this point. Right. But they're losing assets, and they are either powerless. There's some combination of powerless and ignorant of the fact that losing these assets is meaningful. It's meaningful, and it's a real problem because they don't have ideas, they don't have leaders, they don't have the capacity. So you're not gonna have some young, like Richie Torres isn't gonna be like, I need to call Bezos and get him to not change the editorial board, or I need to help strategize a rally on behalf of the White House Correspondents Association. He's got other stuff to do, and he's one of the few people with the creativity and the vision to say we need to have assets. They're losing assets.
This gets back to this whole ethos of what we've talked about. Dan's articulated very well in the past. The Democrats in the media need to say, you're right, and then here's the line, but here's what we care about, or here's what we should preserve. They're missing the opportunity. And I mean, Dan's been singing this from the treetops for months, but it's like, every time I hear a Democrat talk about we can all agree their waste, but we don't like the way we're doing this. My answer is, you had your chance and did nothing. So don't complain that after decades of excuses, someone's finally addressing a $36 trillion debt, a $2 trillion deficit. You may not like it. And again, well, it's not going to address the whole thing. Okay, maybe it gets us a quarter way there, but that's better than the nothing that we're doing now.
Well, I'll just add to this quick, one, please don't tell me it's about debt and deficit, but we'll get to that later on. But two, I think the issue really here for all these companies and Mark, for these institutions is, for the last kind of 20 years, maybe 15, there's been a creep of right and wrong, right? It is hard to run a business where you disrespect half the marketplace. And I think that what is beginning to happen is there's this recognition of, we have to welcome in we have to bring in more customers. We have to be seen as a welcoming place for the other half of the country. And I think for the Democratic Party, it's not that we have to give up our ideals or not fight, but you have to recognize the need to broaden the coalition, to bring in other voices, to at least tolerate and listen to them, versus patronizingly just say, get out.
Correct. All right. One more question, quick question for Dan and Sean, and then get to your questions again. Please raise your hand if you'd like to be in the conversation. We'd love some new folks as well. Who should the Democrats choose to do the opposition response to the president's speech next week? Who would be the smartest choice? Dan?
I would say Marie Perez. I would go smallest.
Okay, this is from Mark Halperin last night.
Owner of the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos, made an announcement today that is really shaking up the Washington Post. And those of you who follow the Washington Post, a lot of turmoil there already, a lot of resignations, a lot of concern about Bezos not endorsing Kamala, the paper not endorsing Kamala Harris. The editorial page editor, the opinion editor of the Washington Post, David Shipley, who's a longtime friend of mine, a wonderful man, and despite what some people on the right are saying, not a crazy liberal, not a liberal, like a hardcore liberal, he quit because Bezos said the paper now is not going to write editorials that aren't in sync with two principles: in liberty and free markets. Okay. He said, we'll write about other topics, but we're not going to write editorials that run counter to those two important principles. And it's a strange thing for an owner to say, but I will tell you, and I have a lot of feelings about it, in part because it involved the resignation of someone I'm quite fond of. Liberals are giving up a lot now that they've considered to be theirs, not just since the election, but a lot since the election. They consider to be theirs that their rich donors, including their Jewish American donors, would write them checks no matter how much the donors objected to university policies on things like Palestine and Israel. They took for granted that the university money would still come in. They took for granted that corporate CEOs would support DEI policies and cater in every respect to their woke employees of whom they were afraid. They took for granted that they could control the Kennedy Center. They took for granted that editorial boards of our major newspapers would almost all be extremely liberal. They took that all for granted. And now you have at the LA Times and the Washington Post billionaire owners who say, we don't want to just have editorial boards that are liberal. It's okay to have some liberal positions, maybe columnists, maybe amongst those on the editorial board, but we don't want to have an editorial board that's just liberal. And this is very unsettling to a lot of people who, again, have taken for granted that in American society, certain of our institutions were just going to be liberal. And one of the Washington Post's best reporters, who writes about economics, tweeted after his boss, Jeff Bezos, said, promulgated this policy. He said, they've not come from me yet. They've not tried to influence my journalism as opposed to the opinion side. And I'm sure all of you know, but I'll say it. Newspapers have a church-state separation between the journalists who do news and the ones who do opinion. At least they're supposed to. He said, they haven't come from me yet, but the minute they do, I'll quit. And I'm putting everybody on notice, including the paper. If they try to tell me what to do, I'm going to quit. That is a weird dynamic to have in the newsroom. All right, one more thing that I'm going to bring our guests in. Today, we still don't know who's going to do the Democratic response to the president's address to a joint session of Congress. It's not a State of the Union because the conventions of history, the first speech they do at the enter office, it's not called the State of the Union. But it's going to look like a State of the Union to everybody. Same theatrics.
It broke today that Alex Thompson and Jake Tapper are coming out with a book in just a couple of months about Joe Biden's mental decline. And I had a lot of people who followed this story closely, especially with the help of your great efforts over the summer, Mark. Alex Thompson is one of the few people who deserves tremendous credit for being on the story well in advance of the debate when it became became temporarily fashionable for the media to consider and reflect on Biden's incapacity.
Just briefly, they only dwell on it briefly.
Yep. And whereas followed Jake Tapper, and while Jake Tapper is very good by CNN standards, I think he is very much not in that category of people who deserve credit. So the question is, do you think that for all I know, the book is only half written yet, given how quickly it's come together. But do you think this book has a good chance of actually reflecting honestly with the role of the media's failures in covering Biden, not just in the immediate period before the debate, but for the several years leading up to that?
Yep.
Or do you think it's more likely to be reputation laundering?
Brilliant question. Amber, I'm guessing you and I are going to agree more on this than Eleanor, but let's see what happens. Amber, what do you think of that excellent question?
Yeah, I mean, Jake Tapper was complicit in the cover-up. There's multiple videos of him from 2020 saying that people who were pointing out Biden's obvious cognitive decline were making fun of his stutter. I mean, he had Laura Trump on his show to talk about it. He cut her off when she said that he looked like he was struggling and accused her of mocking his stutter. She said, I didn't even know he had a stutter. He doesn't look well. And there are multiple tweets that he sent out in the same time frame talking about Biden, defending his critics, basically blasting it as a conspiracy theory. So for 5 years later, for him to sit down with someone who actually was a little bit ahead of the curve, I would say Alex Thompson is a great reporter. He was ahead of most of the mainstream media on this, still a little bit behind from people who were putting it out on the campaign trail in 2020. But I think it really sullies Alex Thompson's reputation to do this with someone who was part of the cover up. And do I think that Jake Tapper, who has one of the biggest egos in the media industry and crawls into people's DMs whenever he gets the slightest hint of criticism, is going to reflect on his own accountability in this book? No, I do not.
Amber, that was a great answer, I got to say. Eleanor.
Tell me more about Alex Thompson. Who was he?
Yeah, he writes for Axios, and as has been correctly described by both Amber and Jeremy, he was ahead of most reporters who write for such organizations and saying there's cognitive decline and that the White House is covering it up and that they browbeat reporters who have the temerity to mention it.
Right. Now, Amber said 5 years ago, not the Biden we saw at the debate, and that was a huge shock to a lot of people. And Trump is having these rolling press conferences all the time, contrasting his vigor with Biden's inability to do that sort of thing. But Biden was in the tradition of most presidents that jealously guard their public comments. And so I didn't really see that as the red flag that maybe it should have been. And there, I wonder more about the White House press corps. There was one reporter at the White House press corps who I'm not going to mention his name because I don't want to get him in trouble, but he's a very good reporter. And he said after the debate that performance that the Biden that press corps saw in the White House every day was closer to that debate performance.
Correct.
early. And that kind of woke me up.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
I think there's some good reporting that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, as somebody who's going to vote Democratic, no matter if he was in an iron lung, I fault Jill Biden. I kept thinking the wife is not going to let him go out and embarrass himself. And so I want to know more about that. So I think this is a good book that's coming out. And I guess he's twinning with Tapper because Tapper's got a platform.
Correct. Jeremy, go ahead. And then I'll say a little bit about this.
Yeah, I think it's just the most damning part of this whole scandal, and I think that's the right word for it, is that it wasn't that necessarily that deep reporting or sourcing was necessary to see what was going on. And maybe it helped to be more congenitally skeptical of Biden in the first place, as those of us on the right have been for many decades. But I've got email, like I have no sources, but I have emails between myself and a friend of mine who happens to be a liberal reporter from the 2020 campaign season, where earlier that day, a video had been making the rounds of an interview that Biden had done just a few years earlier. And I emailed this to my friend saying, is it just me or is the decline from just a few years ago shocking? And she said, no, it's not just you. So I think there was always plenty, it was apparent, and the scandal was there.
Jeremy, I'll repeat some of the things I said in the past and that Amber said. You didn't need secret sources to understand Joe Biden's mental decline. You needed a C-SPAN subscription. And Eleanor's right. You can't look at the State of the Union and say his decline was pronounced every day. But any of us who know someone who has that kind of decline knows you have good days and bad days. Okay. There's a huge story about the cover up of the White House. And from the promotional material of the book, it seems that's their focus. Because those people, Ron Klain and a handful of others, they managed the guy's schedule. They kept him off the phone with members of Congress. They browbeat members of Congress who ever whispered.
So in Michael Wolff's new book on Trump's 2024 election victory called All or Nothing, he says that Trump was about the last person in America to realize how badly Joe Biden was doing in the debate. So due to the angle that Trump was at and where his mind was at, so he didn't see Joe Biden's painful walk to the podium to start the debate, and he was thinking about his own answers to questions, so he wasn't noticing how bad Joe Biden was doing when Joe Biden was absolutely face-planting during the debate. So this new Michael Wolff book is so much fun.
A word about it. They tried to destroy Dean, what's his name from Minnesota?
Phillips.
Dean Phillips. There was a massive government-engineered cover-up that was dangerous to the world. Okay, there's no ambiguity about that, and the book seems to be somewhat about that. There's also, you said scandal. I say the biggest media scandal in American history, because aiding and abetting senior Biden officials were the media, and it's laughable that these organizations that engaged in a broad-based, sustained, significant cover-up, sometimes allowing themselves to be browbeat, but sometimes, I mean, Eleanor talked to a reporter who said, every reporter I talked to said the same thing. We see his decline. They didn't say a word about it. He talked to a dead congresswoman. The country should have come to a standstill. He spoke to a congresswoman who, at an event honoring her death, and he tried to speak to her. Okay, so this scandal, biggest media scandal in American history, that needs to be addressed by all these news organizations who are covering the White House now. They need to own up to what they did, not just institutionally, but the same reporters who tried so hard, motivated by a desire to keep Donald Trump from winning. They're now saying, please let us be in the pool. Please let us cover you. Eleanor, you don't like what I said.
I just don't see that as a big conspiracy among reporters.
It is. It was.
It is.
They were sitting on this and they had this and they
did.
Eleanor, their editors, everybody said.
Eleanor, you just said you talked to a reporter who knew this. So you think that reporter was an outlier?
I think that reporter bought into what a lot of people bought into if they knew Joe Biden over the decades, that he was always a gaffe machine. He couldn't follow thoughts through. I don't think they saw it as out of the ordinary. I just don't.
Eleanor,
reveals that the press actually colluded about this because they didn't want Donald Trump.
What Jeremy and I suspect is the book's only going to be about Ron Klain and the Biden people covering it up. It's not going to be about the culpability of the media. And maybe we'll be wrong.
And if I may, Alex Thompson was doing TV hits about this right after the debate, and there were still members of the media. This was a year ago. Still members of the media calling him
one of the authors of this book.
Yes. He was on TV doing hits about Biden's cognitive decline around the time of the debate, and other media members were attacking him on social media.
Well, speaking of cognitive decline, Eleanor Cliff is just really losing it.
Him of being a conspiracy theorist. This was a year ago. This was not 2020. A year ago. There was a cover up.
The Biden people were doing their job. It was, I think, unpatriotic and wrongheaded and dangerous. But their job was to protect Joe Biden and position him to run for election. The reporters who covered it up were not doing.
I don't know enough about all these reporters that you're referring to sell them out and say it's their fault. I don't see that.
Eleanor, if it wasn't a conspiracy, it was everyone thinking the same thing, which is different but not better.
Yeah, we'll see. And again, maybe the book will surprise me, but I will say I've not seen Jake Tapper on television or social media. He's too busy slipping into Amber's DM to complain about her criticism of him. I've not seen him say.
I hope not.
I've not seen him say my news organization failed. Not seen him say it. And again, when the president
speaks,
if
the book leads him to that conclusion, maybe
save it for the book. I'm skeptical. We're over time. We got to stop. So that was.
Okay, let's go to the NatCon, the National Conservatives, the NatCon Squad episode here, 203.
Correspondents Association controversy.
Right. So much like Trump has declared war on the cartels down in Mexico, he is declaring war on the cartel known as the White House Correspondents Association. which for decades has controlled access to the press briefing room, as well as who gets to serve on pool duty. And for those who are unfamiliar, pool duty is effectively following the president around for the day. It's a small handful of reporters that get to go to events. They're not open to the full White House press corps, and they report on what's happening, what the president is saying, sometimes get to ask questions and transcribe those events and share them out with the rest of the press corps and the media, because there's basically limited space in events that take place in the Oval Office and the diplomatic room and other places on the White House complex or elsewhere outside of that. And the White House announced this week that they are going to be taking control of who gets to serve on the press pool away from the White House Correspondents Association. And this is in addition to adding that new media seat in the briefing room where they've had 1 or 2 people sitting in what are seats that are typically reserved for staff of the White House for groups that are not official members of the White House Correspondents Association to get to ask questions during press briefings. And the White House Correspondents Association is predictably having a meltdown over this, claiming that this is an unprecedented seizure of power from the WHCA and that the White House is effectively choosing who gets to cover the administration and will end up freezing out legacy outlets or mainstream media outlets in favor of outlets that they perceive are friendlier, which at least to this point has not been the case. HuffPost apparently has a seat still in the press pool, as do a lot of other mainstream media outlets. But the WHCA, the way that it operates for basically its entire existence has been to increase access for their friends in liberal and legacy media at the expense of independent and conservative media. And just a couple of examples from my time covering the White House. I was a White House correspondent for the Daily Caller and then covered the White House at least part of the time at the Spectator. And when I was at the Daily Caller, we did not have a permanent seat in the briefing room. I had to stand in the aisle with everybody else who didn't have a permanent seat. And it wasn't until the Biden administration, when they changed the seating chart, that the Daily Caller was finally given a briefing seat. The Spectator never had one. And even still, the Daily Caller seat is shared with multiple other outlets. So all of the large corporate media outlets that get the first 3 rows of seats are permanent. They're in there every single day. If there's a briefing, they know that they're going to have that seat and they're going to get to ask a question. If you work for the Daily Caller or a bevy of other conservative media outlets, you have, let's say, a 5 or 6 day rotation where if there's a briefing on Thursday and you're not in the seat that day, that's too bad, so sad. You have to stand in the aisle and hope that the press secretary sees you. This was a very explicit problem during the Biden administration because Karine Jean-Pierre had an unofficial policy that she did not call on reporters who were standing in the aisle. So if you did not have a seat assigned to you by the WHCA, you effectively had zero access to the administration because Joe Biden hardly ever took questions, and you were basically forced to only get, you were only able to get access during those press briefings, whether it was with Jen Psaki or Karine Jean-Pierre. And the WHCA has been asking conservative media outlets to back its efforts to, 1, get the Associated Press access restored to the White House coverage, and then 2, to oppose the administration taking control of the press pool, which it consists of only like 30 outlets, right? So this is even smaller than the group that is able to go into the briefing room, whether you have a seat or you stand in the aisle, and the WHCA gets to decide the rotation. They claim in some cases it's a lottery system, but amazingly, NBC and CBS and all of the TV reporters always seem to win the lottery. I mean, it's obviously a big scam. But during the Biden administration, especially during the pandemic, there was a significant curtailing of press access because one of the policies that the Biden administration implemented in 2021 was initially, if you wanted to get access to the White House during COVID, you would have to take a COVID test that was paid for by the administration, or you had to have proof that you were vaccinated. They changed that policy such that individual outlets had to actually pay for a daily COVID test, which cost $150 just to get access to the White House campus. So you can imagine if you're an independent podcaster or you work for a smaller conservative news outlet, you cannot afford to pay $150 5 to 6 days a week to be able to access the White House every single day to do your job. And so it naturally favored large corporate media outlets who can, that expense is basically a drop in the bucket for their overall operating budget, even if they have 6, 7 reporters that regularly cover the White House. And the WHCA didn't see a problem with this. They thought that this was no big deal. We have to do the 6-foot social distancing. So all of the people who get seats in the back of the room now not only have to rotate with 5 other outlets, but have to rotate with 30 to 40 different outlets just to get their chance in the briefing seat. I was at the Spectator at the time that formation was announced. I got the seat once every 35 days, I believe. And naturally, the one day that I get the seat, Jen Psaki and later on Karine Jean-Pierre stopped taking questions after the first 2 rows because those are their friends in the corporate media who aren't going to ask them difficult questions. So you wait 35 days to get in the seat, and then you don't get to ask a question anyway. So a bunch of conservative reporters that I know and independent reporters basically just stopped covering the White House during this period because there was no guarantee. In fact, it was the opposite, a guarantee that you weren't ever going to be able to elicit any information from the administration. So when the WHCA comes now and says, oh my gosh, this is an unprecedented affront to press access, you just look at them and say, where were you for the past 4 years when everybody at the bottom of the food chain who's not your personal friend got no chance of covering the White House in a fair manner against these large corporate media outlets? And one final point on this before I open up to the group, I apologize, but this is like my soapbox issue because I've been dealing with this for basically the entire time I've been a reporter. But Biden changed the rules to the White House hard pass system as well. The White House hard passes have always been given out by the White House through the Secret Service. They have never been controlled by the WHCA. And Biden changed the rules so that 400 plus members of the media who had a hard pass, which means you can access the White House campus every single day without having to do a special background check or fill out a form, had those hard passes revoked for no clear reason. They did not explain why they were doing this, but they basically said if you're not on the White House campus 75% of your time on the job, then you don't get to have one anymore. Again, no outcry from the WHCA. So this is very obviously not about press access. This is one of the most accessible administrations in modern history. This is about the fact that the WHCA does not get to control the process to the benefit of legacy outlets at the expense of their colleagues in independent and conservative media. So there's really no time for me for the tears from what is a cabal, a cartel, whatever you want to call it, in terms of press access to the White House.
Yeah, Amber's totally correct about the hypocrisy here. There was no outcry, and all the things she listed, they've yanked press passes from conservative outlets. They've made it impossible for them to ask questions. So this is nothing about this is new. The only thing that's new is who's sitting in the chairs, right? And that's what they're complaining about. So I also have very little patience on that. Like, yes, maybe there is a larger question about, of course, we don't want the president and people in positions of power only, giving interviews or only being asked questions by people they personally selected, screened, like, potentially, gave questions to beforehand, something that we've seen over and over again in Democratic administrations, by the way. Like, yes, that is a bad thing. It is a good thing for people in power to be held to some kind of press scrutiny. But first of all, I don't know how relevant that is in like the 24-hour news cycle with social media and stuff. It's not like people don't see directly what the president and the vice president are saying. Two, as Amber noted, this is not an administration that's been hiding behind only friendly press. Like, as a matter of practicality, I mean, Vance is on the Sunday shows practically every week. President Trump takes questions from hostile media constantly. So like, as a matter of fact, this is an administration that has subjected themselves constantly to the scrutiny, even of these legacy media outlets who are obviously have been, completely dishonest about them in the past. But then, just on the substance of the AP and the Gulf of America thing, like, I have no idea how they can justify not covering this legal name change when they change the names, every time the left change the name of a school or a military base to something obscene, like just completely incredibly crazy, right? Dolores Huerta military base, I'm making that one up, but they went along with that. So like, there's actually no real justification why they don't print Gulf of America, other than, like, I mean, of course you can write an op-ed saying this is a stupid idea to change the name of Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America, but as a matter of like sort of AP standards, I don't see any argument for why they shouldn't. It's an official name change. They are reflecting the official name of the thing now. So it's just funny to me that that's the substance of what this is about. But obviously, bottom line, this is about, there's no real problem with access to the president or this administration taking tough questions. They've taken plenty of tough questions from plenty of, honestly, frankly, dishonest media hacks who have lied about them over and over again. So that's really not the issue here. It's about, who's in and who's out, and legacy media losing their privileged position.
So really briefly, just on the AP side of things, obviously, just to add to the hypocrisy here, the AP via its style book or style guide literally polices the speech of all of legacy media and beyond. So the contrast here is pretty remarkable in the, how dare the Trump administration type response when they literally control and police essentially the language of media writ large. Setting that aside here, I think to both Amber's point and Inez's point, at the end of the day, this is really about a monopoly or an oligopoly losing control of its gatekeeping power, and it hates that. And I think it's a really bad look for the journalist class in terms of the self-importance and the sanctimony of how dare the administration do this when, it's clearly that they're afraid they're losing their power and control, their ability to filter news and information. And it's hurting their business model, it's hurting their pride, it's hurting their prestige, and they hate that. And these cries of Putin, as noted, are ridiculous here when you're talking about the most accessible administration probably in the history of the United States. And I think to kind of add to that, at the end of the day, they don't have an inalienable right to have exclusive, special, privileged access to that president. And that's what they really dislike here, that there's actually some democratization going on in the White House press briefing room, and that threatens their power and prestige and their pride.
Yeah, I mean, with everybody else here, I have zero patience for these people whining. In particular, I'm not happy to see Fox News out there defending the current system. It's pretty obviously there to benefit incumbents and to watch Fox News kind of effectively betray the other conservative outlets in order to maintain their currency as like the only conservative establishment outlet is obnoxious. So I don't have any time for this. This is just entitled journalists who are also quite disgusting. I think Servich has some good tweets out there about the decrepit state of the bathroom in the press briefing room. So yeah, I
can confirm it is disgusting. They literally leave like empty food wrappers everywhere. Like the bathroom's constantly out of order. The vending machine never works. These people are slobs.
And that's before we get to their actual reportage. And on that note, let's turn it back to Will to talk about some coming reforms purportedly at the Washington Post.
So yeah, apparently Jeff Bezos has had quite enough of the current situation with the Washington Post opinion page. He posted on Twitter, or on X rather, that he was essentially changing the direction of the editorial page to focus on free markets and social free and personal liberties. Basically deciding that the Washington Post opinion page should look more like the opinion page at Reason, or something that the Cato Institute would be happy about, which honestly I'm perfectly fine with. The way I basically look at this is a kind of let them fight between classical liberals and establishment Democrats who just suddenly lost access to one of the primary posts and privileges. The Washington Post opinion page is obviously quite unhappy with this. Apparently the opinion editor resigned when told of the new direction of the opinion page, and Philip Bump went out there and tweeted something obscene, basically saying that he was very displeased with it. I think this is actually one of those cases where Jeff Bezos seems to finally getting tired of the Washington Post behavior. I think we saw a little bit of this when he talked about how he wanted the Post to be generally more objective maybe a few months back. I think this is maybe the first actual substantive power move he's made. He's like, guess what? The opinion page is going to be like this now. And I mean, you couldn't see, if liberals were furious about this before, the new establishment liberals are apoplectic at the idea that it would now be a libertarian opinion page rather than just an anti-Trump and pro-Hamas mouthpiece. I think that the Post, every opinion writer at the Post deserves this. I hope they all get fired. I don't necessarily see Bezos as some huge ally of the right, and I don't think that he'll have a lot of influence. I just don't see that his view, this combination of social liberalism and economic libertarianism, to be particularly popular, to have a lot of currency in the country. Certainly doesn't have a lot of currency on the MAGA right, for example, but gosh, if he just wants to seize the power center away from the left, I'm perfectly happy with it. And so I don't know what you guys think about this, but I see it.
Okay, so Michael Wolff has his new book out. Here's an article on the top 10 revelations from the new book, All or Nothing, How Trump Recaptured America. So revelation number 1, Donald Trump called for protests via social media posts, saying he was expecting to be taken into custody. It's time. We just can't allow this anymore. They're killing our nation as we sit back and watch. We must save America. Protest, protest, protest. Unfortunately, virtually nobody is on Truth Social. Donald Trump feared for his life while he was on Jeffrey Epstein's plane. Donald Trump feared dying. His campaign staff rented the plane after Trump Force One repeatedly broke down. I'm going to die on Jeffrey Epstein's plane, Trump howled. According to Wolff, the president had a white-knuckle, head-banging lurch, stomach-dropping turbulence journey with sudden stone-falling drops in altitude and air pressure. People were praying. And then there was a revelation that they were traveling on Jeffrey Epstein's old plane. Trump wanted a female VP. He was eyeing Maria Bartiromo or Harris Faulkner. Elon Musk told Trump his support for the ticket was contingent on Trump picking J.D. Vance. Donald Trump was bewildered by Elon Musk's bizarre behavior when Musk was jumping for joy during a campaign rally in Pennsylvania in October 2024. What is wrong with this guy? Baffled Trump reacted. And why doesn't his shirt fit? So Musk was wearing an Occupy Mars shirt, which lifted when he raised his hands as he awkwardly leaped on stage. Donald Trump seemed on the verge of cracking after the assassination attempt in Pennsylvania before his Madison Square Garden rally. Trump gave up trying to complete sentences. He turned left when he should have turned right. He forgot obvious names. He repeated himself. He erupted in rages. How Trump responded after Joe Biden's disastrous debate. Trump theorized the Democrats orchestrated Biden's disastrous debate performance because they wanted to get him out of the race. How did Donald Trump and Laura Loomer meet? So Wolff says a female campaign aide, Natalie Harp, former One American News Network anchor, was the reliable nutter conduit to Trump. So Natalie Harp is Donald Trump's personal assistant. So she introduced Trump to Laura Loomer. Loomer was entertaining to Trump and an adept flatterer. There was no extreme, straining the bounds of all credulity, right-wing conspiracy theory that she had not adopted and promoted. Trump wanted to have Loomer around for reasons psychosexual or as a reliable source of flattery, though she was eventually thrown under the bus amid the media frenzy surrounding her campaign presence. Speculation that Donald Trump is taking Ozempic, that Melania Trump hates Donald, and that she was basically hiding through most of Trump's campaign. Nobody can tell you where Melania lives. It may be, on its own peculiar terms, the most successful marriage in America, or it may be ready to blow up at any moment. So those are some of the revelations from Michael Wolff's new book, which is covered in Vanity Fair podcast.
Okay, Claire, Michael, let's play headlines. I have one in my pocket.
Throw it out.
I'm
intrigued. Let's hear it.
Okay. Wolff at the door.
What?
What?
I swear. I swear.
Wow. Mind meld. Oh my God.
Did you write the same thing?
I wrote the same thing.
That's wild. I started to write Wolff at the Fox House.
I kept thinking about how this is Michael Wolff's fourth book. Mm-hmm. Somehow he always gets back to the door, gets inside either through first-hand sources, second-hand sources, or Trump himself.
And it's always a moment. Okay, we're going to go with Wolff at the door. Author Michael Wolff has a new bombshell book out called All or Nothing, How Trump Recaptured America. I think it goes without saying that there is a lot to discuss in these pages. His reporting examines the Trump 2024 campaign and the people behind it. The New York Times called his account, quote, undeniably gripping, a veritable harvest of slime, sycophancy, and sleaze that tells the story of Trump 2.0. We published an excerpt of the book on VanityFair.com, which you can find in the show notes. But before we bring Michael on, let's set the stage a bit. So he's just published his latest book, which is his 11th book and his 4th book about Donald Trump. And I'm curious, Claire and Michael, you've read Michael Wolff before, worked with him in your case, Claire. What are you bringing to his body of work?
Yeah, that's right. I was an assistant in a previous Vanity Fair administration during Michael's past time here. And what has always struck me about him is that he's prolific. He is constantly reporting and constantly thinking and constantly producing. And one sometimes wishes as an editor that all writers were working like that.
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten to know Michael having covered the media for a number of years in New York. I mean, Michael's one of the foremost chroniclers of power players in media, most notably Rupert Murdoch, somebody who he has covered for decades now, and at one point got the closest to Murdoch
Michael Wolff is undoubtedly a flawed reporter, a flawed writer, but there are many insights. He also has some extraordinary access, and I find him consistently worth paying attention to. Just another story that's vitally important. So yesterday, the Supreme Court eyed lower bar for white straight workers to sue for bias. So the Supreme Court seemed receptive yesterday to a woman's argument she was discriminated against at work because she is heterosexual. So a ruling that allows her to pursue the claim would open the door for men, for white people, and for heterosexuals to sue for job discrimination in the future. So the court has a solid conservative supermajority, and even some of the liberal justices seem open to hearing the case. So she was barred from advancing in a job because unqualified gay people, according to her, were promoted ahead of her. So half of U.S. appeals courts require that members of majority groups, such as heterosexuals and whites and men, claiming discrimination, that they must meet an additional burden of proof that their employer is an unusual case of discrimination against majorities in what's known as the background circumstances standard. So prior to her suit going to the Supreme Court, lower courts ruled against her. They found that she was unable to meet their particular standard. All sorts of conservative legal groups have supported her. And a lawyer for the Trump administration said on Wednesday, the underlying appeals court ruling was essentially, tell me your race and I will tell you how much evidence you need to produce. Washington Post, Supreme Court seems poised to lower bar for whites to sue for job bias. Marlene Ames challenged rulings requiring members of majority groups to meet a higher bar to prove job discrimination than groups that traditionally face bias. So the Supreme Court appears to support the idea of making it easier for men and white people and straight people to sue for job discrimination. Even the liberal justices seem receptive to arguments made by Marlene Ames. And justices appear ready to strike down the test that if you're white or heterosexual or a man, that you need to meet some additional test before you can sue for bias. All right, this should open up all sorts of litigation. So Supreme Court justices, Wall Street Journal here seem to be ready to review the standard for groups that historically, supposedly, haven't experienced discrimination. So the Supreme Court signaled it would rule that white people, men, heterosexuals who file reverse discrimination lawsuits shouldn't face tougher legal scrutiny than blacks and other minorities with bias claims. So Sam Alito says that courts have been making their rulings based on intuition about the way most employers behave. Maybe your sound at the time no longer sounds sound. Case should be resolved by a short opinion that says discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, whether it's because you are gay or because you are straight, is prohibited, and the rules are the same wherever you go. So looks like white people, men, heterosexuals, are going to have as much right to sue for discrimination as any other minority group.
Precedented access for his book, The Man Who Owns the News. Mm-hmm. And as you said, 4 books on Donald Trump, who is also a creature of the media and very much a New York personality, and I think fits right into the types of characters that Michael has excelled over the years in chronicling.
Right. And I think we've seen, especially with the Trump books, that they are dishy, they can therefore be provocative, they are conversation starters, whatever else they are always an event. And part of the reason we're so happy to have him on today is that we know with 100% certainty that people will be talking about and arguing about and thinking about some of the many revelations that he makes in All or Nothing. We are lucky because we got to read it a little bit early, and we featured an excerpt of it. What did you guys think of the excerpt, and what are you excited to talk to Michael about?
If you haven't read our excerpt yet, it's filled with
the red carpet looks, to the acceptance speeches, to, of course, Vanity Fair's legendary after party, where Claire and I will be celebrating along with all of Hollywood. There
was no long trust with this.
Michael?
Well, I had hoped that this book would be the end of the road. Absolutely. Well, actually, I've hoped that every book would be the end of the road. But I was fairly confident this would definitely be the end of the road. And as per all the other ends of the roads, I appear to be very wrong.
Were you thinking of covering the trial, that this might be the final nail?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that this book is really about is that no one should have reasonably survived what was heaped on Donald Trump. I mean, still even looking back, I think, how is it that he got out of that? How is it that the entire establishment of the United States of America was lined up against this guy, and yet he is now the president of the United States, deconstructing that self-same establishment?
You talk about him as the man for whom luck always breaks.
That's right.
Clearly, that is true. And yet, luck must run out someday, even for people who are preternaturally gifted. And it has not.
So just take a break from Michael Wolff for a second. A radio host in Australia, Marty Sheargold, got fired because he's not into women's soccer. Right? That was a firing offence.
Radio host Marty Sheargold has been forced to apologise this morning after making a series of misogynistic remarks about the Matildas and women's sport in general.
Okay, misogynistic meaning he doesn't care to watch women's sport.
The comedian is now facing widespread condemnation. Here are the comments he made on Triple M and shared on Instagram.
In football or soccer, it's been a nightmare tournament for the Matildas over the last 3 or 4 days over in the US.
You know what they remind me of? Year 10 girls. Now, I'm sorry to undermine the whole sport, but that's what I think of it, so you can stick it up your ass.
So we're playing in the She Believes Cup.
Oh, She Believes in what? It better be men!
We're 12 months out from Australia hosting the Women's Asian Cup, so hopefully we have a bit of runway to improve before that comes around.
The Asian Cup. I'd rather hammer a nail through the head of my watch that. Got any men's sport?
Yeah, I do.
For more, we're joined by commentator and retired player Grace Gill. Grace, thanks for joining us. What was your reaction when you first heard the comments?
To be honest, a level of disbelief. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, what I was listening to, just out-and-out misogynistic remarks. And one part that's really shocking, but another part I was like a little unsurprised in that moment, but just incredibly, incredibly disappointing.
So you get fired for saying you don't want to watch women's soccer, that you're not interested in watching women's sports, and this bloke gets fired for that. Right? He's a terrific comic. All right, he's a comic. He makes jokes, and he was telling a truth that a lot of people aren't particularly interested in women's sports, and that's a basis for firing a bloke. That's crazy.
Yet run out.
So part of your commitment to covering Trump is to be there when it does?
Yeah, I have always thought that I would be the guy right there when the train crashed.
So I was struck early on in the book by how you described Trump's sense of reality, specifically that he never thought his political career was over. And it's even more striking now knowing that you thought it was over, but he never thought it, even when it seemed that way. Clearly, as we know, he never acknowledged the results of the 2020 election. So in his mind, he really was still the president. Can you describe a little bit about, this is a big focus of the book, this cast of characters that's around him and kind of how they play into that sense of his reality?
There's several orbits around him. And let me put the closest orbit just aside for the moment and say the orbit after that, and this is one of the interesting things about this campaign, was relatively professional people. Susie Wiles, Chris LaCivita, those are Republican.
Yeah, this is the most professional Trump campaign ever. All right, I just love this story from Australia. I agree with this commentary here.
Man is fired for doing his job, which has me asking...
The whole world gone crazy!
That's right, Marty Sheargold. He was fired for doing his job, and there's been a furor. He's been slammed. He's been fired from Triple M. They have parted ways over his horrible, offensive comments. And why do I say he's doing his job? He has a reputation. They know who Marty is. They know what he does. Check out this clip from Have You Been Paying Attention?
You can be black or yellow or white. It doesn't matter. What does matter is the size of your...
Why did we give this one to Marty?
See, they know. Why would you give the obvious dong joke to Marty? Because he's going to make the dong joke. So why is everyone so surprised that he said something that, was trad mask, if you want to go in all those weird Zoomer terms. He was being a dude, making dude jokes. That's what he does. But, it's this huge thing, so much so that Albanese, he needs to weigh in on it too. Fucking unacceptable and offensive. No, he's not talking about the Chinese warships. He's talking about Marty Sheargold. No, he loves the Chinese. They did nothing wrong, remember? Remember, we spend more to them than they spend to us. We are you handsome boy. Insane. What did Marty actually say? Why is it so bad? Let's listen to the audio.
Football or soccer, it's been a nightmare tournament for the Matildas over the last 3 or 4 days over in the US.
You know what they remind me of? Year 10 girls. Now, I'm sorry to undermine the whole sport, but that's what I think of it, so you can stick it up your ass.
So we're playing in the She Believes Cup.
Oh, She Believes in what? It better be men!
We're 12 months out from Australia hosting the Women's Asian Cup, so hopefully we have a bit of runway to improve before that comes around.
The Asian Cup. I'd rather hammer a nail through the head of my watch that. Got any men's sport?
Yeah, I do. Baseball.
That's it. That's what he got fired for. Because he said he doesn't like women's sport. He'd rather have a nail plunged through the end of his pecker. And he said that when he sees them, he makes them think of year 10 girls. Now, who are the Matildas? This is what he's talking about. Let's remember, specifically contextually, he's talking about the Matildas soccer team. That's important. Context matters, right? Who are the Matildas? The Matildas are the ones who, they came fourth in the World Cup and have done pretty much crap all ever since. But they got a bronze plaque. They're going to get a statue, but instead they got this giant bronze plaque wall to commemorate their fourth place finish because, that's what you get. There's always a podium, first, second, third, and no, there's nothing for fourth. Fourth is not a top three. You don't get anything for that. But, the Matildas are a bit of a protected class. Their captain, of course, she just got let off from her racist comments, having a go at the copper, calling him stupid and white. The rest of the team, many of them are in that protected sort of same-sex relationship category where, that means they're above reproach. Nothing they say or do is wrong and they are perfect and must be upheld in every way at all times. But the fact of the matter is, women's sport's not as popular. I got Grok's new deep search feature no, there's no joke in the deep thing there. They can do a deep search on popularity of men's versus women's sports and attendance and spectator numbers. Then it pulled through and it found these numbers for me and shows with the NBA and WNBA, average attendance, double that for the men than the women. In the finals, almost triple per game that the women get. And a more male viewership as well. Guess what? On the women's sport, it's still more dudes watching. The women don't even want to watch the women's sport. So why are we making such mountains out of molehills over poor Marty Sheargold? Because he's a straight white dude, which makes him toxically masculine. Because you see, one of the biggest people coming out on X attacking him all the time is the new men's behavior change dude from Victoria. He's coming out and he's consistently saying, oh, Marty shouldn't have said this and Marty shouldn't have said that. And look, since the comments on radio, other things that Marty said about women's health have come out. And that's getting raked through the coals as well. Here we go. Tim Richardson. Well over 11 million Australians watching Matilda saw the immense significance of women's sport. This is more than any other sporting event in our history. Marty Sheargold's disrespectful language toward women and girls has absolutely no place in Australia. Now, I think he was talking specifically about the Matildas and that he had no desire to watch the Matildas play soccer. I have no desire personally to watch dudes play soccer. I don't like soccer. I'm not sure that I'd drive a nail through my pecker. I like my pecker. I'm not doing that. I just won't watch the sport. should a radio shock jock who's known for making outlandish dong jokes and being a little bit old school blokey choco man, that's his job. That's what you hired him to do. He does his job and he gets fired. We are cooked. And that our Prime Minister thinks this is something to be outraged over when he doesn't care that a foreign nation has parked warships a couple hundred miles off the coast of Sydney. I won't apologise for being upset because it's ridiculous. This is ridiculous, and that's why. Just a quick one today. Just want to.
Okay, so maybe Australia and maybe the rest of the world will start to get free speech, right? Does not Europe and Australia and New Zealand, don't they look at America and go, "Oi, mate, I wish I had this amount of free speech," right? You really think Germans are cool with having their police hunt down people who post memes? Okay, without giving, what topics do you think I would have more truth to offer than what you are currently sharing? Nothing comes to mind, but if I were terminally ill, right, I wouldn't have to think, 5, 10, 20, 40 years in advance. So I'd have to think about that, but I wouldn't be filtering what I had to say quite as much if I had just say a few weeks to live. Right, this is Michael Wolff. Let me think about that comment there, Ricardo.
Operatives, their whole measure of success is not ideology, it's just winning.
Yeah, traditional.
So the Matildas refers to the Australian women's soccer team.
Yes, and they're good at it. They're good technicians in this, and they kind of.
Oh, I would tell more truth about myself. Right, I present a carefully curated version of myself on this show. And so if I were just about to die, you would likely get a less curated version of myself. So I'd be more open about myself and tell more truth about myself if I were about to die.
Functioned in this sort of secondary orbit. They were allowed to do their jobs. And so they did them and did them quite well, partly because they had relatively little interference. He is directly surrounded by several figures, including the two figures that are highlighted in the Vanity Fair excerpt of my book, a guy by the name of Boris Epstein, a lawyer, and a young woman by the name of Natalie Harp. And these are, I mean, there's no other way to describe them except the ultimate yes people. I mean, they are there precisely because they know what he wants to hear, precisely because they can deliver that and deliver it even more. They can surprise him with what he wants to hear. It's to such an extent that he will at times even make fun of them. There's at one point in the book.
Okay, good times. My old friend Ricardo is back in the chat. Let's go through Ricardo. Has Luke retired? He's doing a lot of midday streaming. Streaming for lunch is not a life that works. Is he doing it for America? Is he doing it for Peter Thiel bucks? Come on, mate. You missed me trashing Peter Thiel. I guess I did. Apologies. I can only consume so much high-quality content. Ricardo says, I have deep concerns about the direction that we are going. How so? Too much winning? We're getting Silicon Valley technocracy. And Ricardo thinks that's a bad idea. Luke, you should get Vincent Bruno on to talk about Noahidism and talk about Trump's faith advisor, Paula White. She's a Pentecostal, so no, I don't want to have Bruno on the show. Luke, if you were terminally ill, would you do anything different with your streaming content? Would you remove the filter and start optimizing for truth? Yes, I would optimize more for truth, and I'd probably tell more truths about myself and my life if I were terminally ill. Luke regularly thinks about his actions on a 20-year time horizon. He's basically the Kwisatz Haderach, and he is a character in Dune, a messianic super being with the power to bridge space and time. The term translates to shortening of the way. So people have, I've often used that term on me, and I always forget what it means. But there you go.
He holds the phone out. It's Boris Epstein on the phone, and he holds it out, and he says, "Oh, it's my Boris. He's going to tell me why I've been indicted again and why that's such a wonderful thing." And so you would think that Trump has some self-awareness here, and that he's going to dismiss the advice of his yes men, but he doesn't.
Right.
I mean, he can both acknowledge that, he can both ridicule them and then embrace them for the fact that they are utterly subservient to him.
Well, I noticed too, you make this excellent point that he, in the scenes that you describe in the books that have to do with his trials, for example, he's constantly running down his lawyers. My lawyers are terrible, right? Lawyers are
beyond that. I mean, it's a kind.
Trump sounds like an absolute nightmare to work for. I mean, you have to put up with so much abuse and someone who's just raging, incredibly mercurial. Oof.
Kind of invective that I would hope all of us would say, no, this is too much. We can't tolerate this.
So I'm really pleased with the direction of the new Trump administration. It has exceeded my wildest expectations. I'm incredibly pleased that the House of Representatives appears on pace to pass a budget and a tax cut. Blessings. How much would it cost to sponsor an hour of Vincent and David? I'm sorry. Thank you so much for the super chat. I'm sorry. It would cost $100. I'm sorry to make the price that high. Yeah. I'm sorry. Sorry to be so difficult.
This is
a toxic work environment for the lawyers.
This is not human. And these are lawyers. These are people who you hire for their expertise and advice, which he immediately, not only does he overrule.
So most lawyers are really good at client control, right? Keeping their client under control, because clients often want to run the case, but they don't know. Oh my God, we set it up. So Ricardo wants me to set up an hour of David versus Vincent Bruno. I named the price. It's done. I'm going to have to host that. Okay, I'll reach out to David. I don't know Vincent's contact number, but yeah, client control. All right, most attorneys are really good at controlling your client, because if you allow the client to control the case, the client is not a legal professional. They're just going to run it into the wall. But occasionally there are attorneys who get intimidated by their clients. They get manipulated. They get into all sorts of trouble with their clients. They start exchanging intimate details of their life with their clients. They become friends with their clients. Their clients get blackmail power over them. And then the attorney is just not going to be effective, right? The only attorneys who are going to be effective for Trump are those who are able to stand up to him and not allow him to run the show.
Rule, but he vilifies them for it.
Right, because he's smarter and better than they are.
Absolutely. But I would also it is extremely important to point out, these are the exact same people who now run the Justice Department of the United States.
Right.
Correct?
I mean, I flashed back as I was reading these compelling descriptions that you write. I flashed back to the first Trump administration and his insistence that he was surrounding himself with the best people. And it really struck me.
Okay, I'm going to reach out to David. I don't have Vincent's contact info. Here we go.
Because this time around, at least when he's talking about the lawyers and what have you, there's not even a pretense that he thinks they're the best people. They're the best people for him because he can vilify and steamroll them, and then he can kind of rise up and be better than them.
Yeah,
and he can empower them whether you like it or not.
Yeah, no, there's one point in the book where I recount that he takes out his phone, he shows somebody, he says, well, I may not have the best legal team, and then he takes out the phone, but I have the hottest. And again, you go, who says this? Who would say this?
Well, he kind of does that thing with Natalie too, right?
Yeah, completely. and he's always, I mean, it's weird to the people, to this other orbit. The Natalie thing is, here's this young woman, she's 30 years old. She is the person with him who is the closest person to him. I mean, she is with him.
Literally, she's
yes,
physically
I
the
would say
closest
she
person.
is with him, and certainly through the campaign for every waking act.
Ricardo just tells the truth in a way that's just so natural for him that I feel embarrassed by comparison. Luke has a new side business, renting space in his digital arena for people to bring their favorite LOL cows for some good old-fashioned internet bum fights. Okay, that's really funny. That's really funny, and I won't describe how funny that is in this particular instance.
I mean, I've gone through the plain manifests, and there's a lot of people who are with him often, but she is with him 100% of the time. And the world is filtered through her. She gives him, she's constantly printing out whatever he sees from the news, from emails. This is all comes from her. And so she's sort of feeding him. And within the campaign, they would say she supplies the uppers and downers. And that's in the form of news or emails or people confirming what he wants to believe, or the stuff that will get him angry. And then he'll respond to that in a, then he'll lash out in the Trumpian way.
Right, because grievance feeds him.
In private, he's discursive and bombastic in public, and he treats his lawyers like shit every which way. But in private, how does he treat his staff and these lackeys? Does he have her gregarious and gentle and, bask in the warmth of his son's side?
No. I don't think there's much of a difference. I don't think he has a private persona.
Everything's the show.
Everything is on his sleeve, and everything comes into his, one of the people close to him who I would speak to often would say, this is not, and I would say, are you sure about this when you told me this? He said, not only am I sure, but he says this all the time to everyone. He doesn't just say one thing to one person. He says whatever he says it to everyone. So he's this broadcast character. And I kind of think, I've never seen him alone, of course, but I have this image of him just sort of deflating, just going down when there aren't people around him to constantly.
So when you do as much live streaming and blogging as I do, there's an element of it that might be understood as selling your soul, right? You are commodifying your soul, your personal experiences, and retailing them online. And there's probably a price to pay for that in your private life, right? When you make so much of your private life public, all right, that can't help but then feed back on what goes on privately. And I think the only way to navigate this in an adaptive fashion, which I think I generally do, is by having some curation of what you share online. So there are some intimate parts of my life that I'm willing to share online, but there are whole sectors of my life that are very important to me, and my most important friendships, etc., I just never talk about online. So it is possible to be open about some sectors of your life, but keep other sectors of your life completely private. And that way you prevent your public presentation from feeding back, constricting, restricting, reducing the quality of your private life. I am not aware of my live streaming and my blogging over the past 5 years negatively affecting my private life.
Constantly monologized, constantly being broadcast to. During the first administration, when I would see him in the Oval Office, it would be an Oval Office filled with people, 20, 30 people, him sitting behind the desk, always behind the desks. At some point, somebody describes he doesn't like anyone to get behind him on the desk. So he's in, and everyone is there, and they're all sitting there, and he's just monologizing.
One thing I think has been a mainstay of covering Trump 1.0 and Trump now 2.0 is that people come and go, and they come and go and come and go, and a lot of characters are, exiled, and then they come back again, and maybe there's something about these types of Trumpian characters that they managed to get back in his good graces, catering to his whims and his interests. Also, I'm curious for you too, because you were in the Oval Office for Fire and Fury. You were in the White House. You're getting incredible access. Trump is mad about the book. But then you've written 2 other books, and now this is the 4th book.
Yeah,
What's your experience coming back in and out of this orbit?
I was expelled, and the worst thing that ever happened. And then suddenly I'm writing another book, and he was told about this, and he said, oh, that guy gets ratings. Let's have him down. And he was at Mar-a-Lago then. And then I got the invitation to come for dinner with him and Melania at Mar-a-Lago. What was that about?
Wait, what was that like?
That was, it was like you would actually, if you thought about it, assume it would be. You go down, he sits with you for 2 hours monologizing, and then you don't get a word in edgewise. And then he waits for the patio to fill up. And then he goes out, big round of applause. And then he sits at this table, which is in the center, but with a kind of cord around it, a
like
velvet
a little
robe.
VIP area.
And then he and Melania, and she's not always there. Sometimes she's seldom there. But when she is there, it's like at the wedding table. They're the bride and groom, and he speaks. The monologue goes on. He speaks blah 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 blah, and then it doesn't matter. He can just shift, and he doesn't begin again. He just goes, and it just keeps going on to whoever is in his range. And then she sits there, and she's very, it's kind of maximum or hyper graciousness. Hello, how are you? Nice to see you. It's just an endless stream of what you're supposed to say, and it never once dips below that.
Wow.
And then I'm sitting in the middle of this trying to get a drink.
Right. I was going to say, what did you eat?
Yeah, a steak, of course.
Of course.
But you can't. But to get a drink, it's like. And then he says, "Oh, you want a drink? Get him a drink." And then that drink never comes. So.
So you write in this book about somebody else who seems to be coming in and out of the orbit pretty much whenever he wants to. I think a running theme of the book is Jared Kushner. He's there when he wants to be. He's MIA other times. He seems to be very strategic and disciplined of when he engages with the campaign.
Right. Melania, according to this new book, she was only willing to go on stage with Trump on election night if he won. And Jared Kushner, he only re-enters Trump's orbit when Trump is winning. And I remember in the final 2 weeks of the campaign, Michael Wolff came out with a podcast talking about all this disturbing Jeffrey Epstein-like material he had on Donald Trump, and I was afraid it was going to cost Trump the election. You might remember in the final 2 weeks, Mark Halperin said he was being fed stories that, if true, would end Donald Trump's campaign or would end Kamala Harris's campaign. And so I was afraid that Michael Wolff was the one thing standing between Donald Trump and a 2024 victory.
Or with Trump world in general. Other times he's not there. So you write, Kushner's own clear and immediate post-White House plan was to put distance between himself and his father-in-law. Asked about his father-in-law's future by a friend, Kushner replied, "What was Nixon's future?" So it seemed at that point he wanted nothing to do with it. During the campaign, as you wrote, and we've reported here at Vanity Fair at the time, people were talking he wants to get back in the orbit to be Secretary of State. So what is the relationship with Kushner and Trump, and what do you expect in this?
Right. Every time you walk into a room or every time you're around people, you should get a quick price for your standing in the social marketplace, right? How eager are people to talk to you? How eager are people to leave your presence? I've had that. I've been so unpopular that no one wants to be seen talking with me. A girl that I was sleeping with on and off, and she came to my shul. She didn't want me to walk her out because she could tell that people in my shul, this is 25, 30 years ago, did not hold me in high regard, and she didn't want to experience my low status contagion. So every time you talk to someone, every time you wait to have a call returned or an email returned, you're getting a checkup on your social status. And so Donald Trump experiences this as well. All right, when he's on the ascendancy, everybody wants to be with him. After January 6th, all right, almost nobody wanted to be with him.
This new administration, where's Jared Kushner going to be?
Well, I think Jared was the only successful member of the Trump entourage from the first White House, and I might extend that. I mean, for everyone else, it ends in tears. 100%, it ends in tears. So Elon, what's going to happen there? You know, we can judge from what has happened in the past. It ends in tears. The only one who has been consistently in the circle, maintaining the relationship and profiting by it is Jared Kushner. You know, now I've always thought Jared is. I mean, I've spent fair amount of time with Jared. I've never been particularly impressed. I mean, he seems fine. Nevertheless, you have to say he has navigated this relationship. You know, I think he has the advantage, of course, of being the son-in-law. But you know, there are no real advantages around Trump. I think that it is on Jared. I think he understood that this had to be navigated. Jared always did things that essentially Trump was not interested in. You know, the Middle East. Well, Trump is not really interested in the Middle East. So that gave Jared a kind of carte blanche, and he obviously did arguably a credible job in terms of the diplomacy there, and then, of course, went on to secure billions of dollars for his own future. And I think that he has weighed this, what to do, how to work this. And if I had any advice to give to the people around Donald Trump, I would say, look at Jared. You know, Jared is not in the White House now for a reason.
Well, I was going to say, if it always ends in tears, why do you think people keep lining up to be humiliated? There is some power and influence in the moment.
No, I mean, it goes to the definition of human cravenness, I think. I mean, that people would not have seen what's going to happen here. I mean, we've seen it over and over again, not just in the time in the White House, but for the entirety of Donald Trump's career. And yet people are going back. And they go back because there's an illusion. I mean, it's the White House, it's power, it's all of those things. And I think now, you know, people are thinking, well, look at what's going on. I mean, every day he's doing something, he's breaking things, he's changing things, he's the man of the moment, which lets them believe that somehow they're going to become historical figures instead of someone in tears.
You also write that they believe something about him. You write, having seen him survive what other mortal politicians never could, they've come to believe he knows something, sees something, gets to the heart of something, some new reality that the rest of us don't. Can you put your finger, after all these years, can you put your finger on what it is that they think he gets? Or is it all magical thinking?
Well, I think the fact that he survives and then prospers is what people...
He gets the American people. He saw the $100 bill just lying there on the ground and picked it up. The need for control of immigration, for reconfiguring our trade policy so that it be in the best interests of American workers. And he sees the need for America to stay out of forever wars, which is not... None of these things are popular with the news media. They don't really want to write about immigration control. They don't want to write about how strategic use of tariffs would be good for American workers. And they refuse to acknowledge how terrible the useless forever wars have been for America. So Trump sees these $100 bills lying on the ground and he picks them up and he meets the needs of a substantial number of Americans, and he's pretty darn good at reading the room. Not perfect, but he's pretty darn good at noticing what people respond to and what they don't.
I think
it's an end in itself.
I think they say, well, I have to give up. I mean, he obviously knows what he's doing. Now, that doesn't explain what they should also know, which is that it will come to no good end for them. But I don't know. Hope wills out.
Everybody wants to think they're special, right?
So, speaking of people who must be special in some way, who you brought up, Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles, who you write is the closest thing Trump had to a campaign manager. You describe them as not ideologues, but professionals bent on winning. I would love to know more about them and their relationship to Trump.
One of the interesting things is that Chris LaCivita has disappeared. So he is not in the White House. He did not get to go into the White House. And I think that there was a lot of blowback of the intense MAGA crowd because Chris LaCivita is not particularly an ideologue. And I think that cost him quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't exactly know the backstory of why he didn't get a job, but he did not get a job.
Mm.
And, Susie Wiles is she's really good at this. I mean, really good at, almost in the Jared way. And she is a Jared person. Jared put her into this job. And she has been particularly successful at staying out of Trump's way. She's the person, and she has cast herself as the person who makes the trains run on time.
Mm-hmm.
So she's not concerned, very much, I'm not the larger picture. I'm not the this, I'm not the that. I'm just, face down. I make sure that nobody is stealing money from you kind of person, which he likes because he always feels that everyone is stealing money from him. But again, for her, too, it's not she has been careful to stay out of the ideological wars here.
How do you think she's thinking about Elon right now?
I think she can't abide him. I mean, I think he's a real pain in the ass for her. She's smart enough. Elon's the flavor of the moment, so you don't get in the way of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's as interesting to think, what does Trump think about Elon?
So looking at posts here on X from Preston Stewart, the highest number of transgender service members I've seen is 15,000. Transgender troops are now disqualified from service in the American military without a special exemption.
At this
point. Yeah, when you talk about Trump giving these monologues sitting at the desk, all of a sudden now you have Elon with his kid bouncing around the Oval Office doing an impromptu presser. When I watch that, I have to think, Trump can't be enjoying this.
Craziness. And I would say that there are two things. First, Elon now becomes the perfect foil. If anything goes wrong, it can be blamed on Elon. But the other thing is Trump has gotten himself into a kind of corner here because of the press saying that this is going to end in tears with Elon. So therefore, the press can't be right. Mm-hmm. Therefore, Trump has to be willing to accept this. So that's for the moment. Well, everything in Trump world is for the moment. So how long does this go on? I mean, it has an end date. We just don't know what that end date is.
Yeah, I thought especially as you write in a book about Time Magazine and Trump's reverence for these kind of old media brands. And when I saw Elon on the cover of Time Magazine, it flashed back in my head to when Steve Bannon was on the cover of Time Magazine. These are the types of things that can, stick in Trump's craw. But it seems like for now, at least with Elon, they were with Sean Hannity recently, they're still sort of buddy-buddy, at least publicly.
Yeah, no. And remember, Steve Bannon lasted 6 months, and Steve was very much in that Elon position at that point. Omnipresent, he was articulating what they were going to do. He was the co-president, blah, blah.
Is there somebody you think is key in Trump's orbit right now who we haven't talked about?
Well, Melania.
Yes, a cipher in your book.
Yeah, I mean, that could go, whatever it is, in whatever tension it exists now, that could go south at any moment. And I think that there's an awareness, I think probably on the part of Trump, but also on the staff, that this is a precarious thing. And from the staff's point of view, they don't understand it at all. I mean, it's like close your eyes to this.
You wrote about how she was a hurdle on the night of the debate with Biden. The Trump team realized that Jill prominently, publicly hugging Joe would be a thing that the public would see, and Melania wouldn't be there to hug Trump, and she's increasingly not around. What do the people inside think of her absence? Do they think she needs to be more around?
At one point, I said, she did not make one campaign appearance until the Madison Square Garden thing at the, in the last week. She was never even on the plane. I know of one instance, and she was just hitching a ride on the plane. She never made a courtroom appearance. So there's a story I recount in the book where she's approached by a member of the staff. This will be Stand By Your Man, and she says, "Nice try," and laughs, and it sounded like laughs derisively. So an awareness of this. So at some point I said to somebody, I said, come on, just tell me what's going on here. And the answer I thought I would get is, well, they have their...
So Kellyanne Conway got divorced from her Trump-hating husband, and George Conway, and she apparently wanted back onto the Trump campaign. So there was drama. Corey Lewandowski wanted to run the campaign. He wanted to bring Kellyanne Conway back, but Trump ultimately sided with Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita. And so you get a lot of that inside information in this new book by Michael Wolff.
This is the way this relationship works, and it's...
every marriage is different.
Exactly. But this person looked at me like I was, what was I, a moron? And said, what do you mean? She hates his guts. And I thought, damn, that is obviously true.
And yet there she was at the inauguration in the hat that went viral, and people are loving her. And you have to think she might mean something more to his public image than any of us give her credit for.
I think she does mean.
Yeah.
That's why it's so volatile.
Yeah.
Now, how they have been able to construct this is also a mystery to me. I mean, why the American public doesn't say what's going on with this? This is not a marriage like any marriage that we've experienced, that we have. But nobody, I don't know, and that's partly a media thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
it's like a third rail.
Yeah, I mean, everybody knows they do not live together. She is not there. She was not there in the first White House. She's not there now. She's not even at Mar-a-Lago. I am just, you run out of...
You also make a very interesting point about the timing of her book.
Yeah, she rushed that book, I thought, because, what it said to me was, I better get this book out here now because he's going to lose.
Because it came out in October of 2024. Mm-hmm.
Right, and it obviously it actually is it has done very well. It's such a peculiar book, too.
Weird.
It really, to me, feels like the first wholly AI written book. And it's weird, it's strange because nobody is thanked in the book. So maybe there is no one to thank. But there is, in people within the campaign would talk about this sense of the competition between the two of them. They each have their projects, and they're each out to make this money, what would kind of seem like small change money off of these small change projects. Although it turns out it's not necessarily small change because he has billions of dollars in crypto and Truth Social stock.
And Christmas ornaments. Don't forget the Christmas ornaments.
Bibles. Sneakers. Yes.
Okay, let's leave it there.